Recently, there's been a lot of talk in the media and on the blogosphere about hate groups in America and the threat that they pose to this country. While almost everyone may have their own particular concept of what qualifies as a hate group, it is definitely worth asking what the official, legal definition of the term is. Actually, this is a bit of a trick question, as there is no legal definition of a hate group. In fact, because there is no legal definition, even the FBI does not, cannot designate hate groups. Enter the Southern Poverty Law Center of Montgomery, Alabama. The lack of a legal definition for hate group is of no consequence to this law center. The SPLC is the primary arbiter and designator of the hate group label. When the SPLC was founded in 1971 by two lawyers, Morris Dees and Joseph Levin, its primary goal was to see to it that the sweeping civil rights laws enacted in the mid-1960s were enforced in the Deep South. To its credit, the SPLC was highly successful in its legal challenges to discriminatory practices in Alabama and other states in the early days, but in 1981, Morris Dees decided to change the center's focus from individual civil rights cases to the far more lucrative business of designating and tracking hate groups. Remember, there is no legal definition of a hate group, which means that a hate group is whatever Mr. Dees and his organization decide it is. The man most responsible for promoting the hate group label in the media is the SPLC's public relations chief, Mark Potok. Mr. Potok has no legal or law enforcement background, yet this law center pays him $150,000 a year to promote the hate group brand in the media and in fundraising materials. Mr. Potok is now the media's go-to man when it comes to stories about hate groups. Mr. Potok's own definition of the term states that all hate groups have beliefs or practices that attack or malign an entire class of people, typically for their immutable characteristics. This definition is as good as any, but again, it is Mr. Potok's private opinion and completely subjective. The terms malign and attack are deliberately ambiguous, and as we shall see shortly, Mr. Potok's definition of a group leaves much to be desired as well. Mr. Potok further qualifies his definition by stating that a hate group has nothing to do with criminality, violence, or even the potential for violence. Rather, according to Mr. Potok, it's all about ideology. No crime, no violence, just wrong thinking. The beauty of this deliberately open-ended definition is that it allows Mr. Potok and the SPLC to attack any group without accusing it of any actual crimes. Remember, because there is no legal definition, the SPLC has no more authority, legal or moral, to designate hate groups than does the SPCA, or you, or me. The term hate group is nothing more than a marketing ploy. Let's take a minute to look at some of Mr. Potok's hate groups. First of all, we have the usual low-hanging fruit that most people associate with the term. Mr. Potok identifies some of the more familiar characters and some less familiar. In the event that Mr. Potok cannot pigeonhole you in one of his more traditional groups, he's devised a special catch-all category, general hate. That's rather handy, isn't it? Mr. Potok also makes the astonishing claim that hate group activities can include criminal acts, marches, rallies, speeches, meetings, leafletting, or publishing. It is especially disturbing to see a so-called civil rights group deliberately conflating six of the most fundamental, constitutionally protected First Amendment civil rights with criminal acts and hate group activities. Think about that for a minute. We may not always agree with what others have to say, but they have the same fundamental rights to their opinions and thoughts as any other Americans. The term hate group is little more than a smear calculated to stifle the free speech of those the SPLC does not agree with. By far, Mr. Potock's most lucrative fundraising tool is his annual hate map, which purports to identify hate groups across the nation on a state-by-state basis. Every spring, when Mr. Potok releases his latest hate map, the media obediently regurgitates his numbers without ever performing even the most rudimentary fact checks on them. For example, of the 1,018 groups designated by Mr. Potok for 2011, fully 247 of them are not affiliated with any known city or town. Mr. Potok cannot locate them on any map, including his own. That's 25% right off the top, and Mr. Potok offers very little information about the remaining groups either. Let's take a closer look at Mr. Potok's data. First, go to www.splcenter.org, or you can just Google the term hate map. When you get to the actual hate map, simply click on a state, your home state or any other. The number on each state represents the number of hate groups Mr. Potok has designated for that particular state. Let's start with New England. The first thing you notice about Maine is that 5 of its 6 alleged groups are homeless. In New Hampshire, half of the groups are homeless, and Mr. Potok counts the one in tiny Richmond twice, just to pad the numbers. IHM Media and the Immaculate Heart of Mary are housed in the same building. 80% of Connecticut's groups are phantoms. In Rhode Island and Vermont, an incredible, literally incredible, 100% of Mr. Potok's groups are nowhere to be found. Heading south, it turns out that 7 of West Virginia's 15 alleged groups are homeless, and Mr. Potok counted the ragtag remnants of the National Alliance in Fly-Speck Hillsborough 3 times, just to pad the numbers, as he did in New Hampshire. Without a doubt, the most egregious of Mr. Potok's number padding schemes is found in the state of Georgia. Click on that state's map, and then click the City tab on the left and scroll down. In March of 2012, Mr. Potok added 20 chapters of something he calls the Georgia Militia to that state's map, but he can't seem to locate 18 of them. Instead, Mr. Potok simply added 18 empty slots marked Georgia Militia to his list, as shown here. This is hard data? In all, 29 of the 65 groups allotted to Georgia are phantoms. Fortunately for Mr. Potok, it really doesn't matter what numbers he pulls out of his imagination, as almost nobody in the media will ever examine his claims. Over the years, Mr. Potok has made some rather interesting admissions about his hate group list. Potok says that many of the groups are small, and there's no way to gauge their membership. Potok says the SPLC does no original research of its own. It's little more than a multi-million-dollar news clipping service. And a group doesn't even have to be an actual group to get on Mr. Potok's list. Potok says inclusion might come from a minor presence, such as a post office box. A post office box? Really? This is hard data? Some experts, So what's the real problem here? When it was just a case of Mr. Potok gulling his gullible donors out of tens of millions of dollars a year, that was one thing. Mr. Potok's donors are all adults, and they can spend their money any way they please. Caveat emptor. The problem is that the SPLC sends its worthless hate group reports to every law enforcement agency in the country, including the Department of Homeland Security. In 2009, the Missouri Highway Patrol issued a report to its troopers with language lifted right out of the SPLC's fundraising propaganda. That report informed the officers that a great way to identify domestic extremists was to look for third-party bumper stickers on their cars. In recent years, similar SPLC language has turned up on official DHS documents. Because of the media's total refusal to examine any of Mr. Potok's claims, the SPLC has cultivated a patina of legitimacy. In 2011, The Atlantic ran a story linking hate groups to Republican districts, based on Mr. Potok's numbers. In April of 2012, an academic journal no less, the Social Science Quarterly, published a study asserting that the presence of a Walmart in a given county directly correlated to the presence of hate groups in that county. That study, based on faulty data from the get-go, was endorsed by the Department of Homeland Security and reprinted in DHS materials. In recent months, Mr. Potok has been making a subtle shift in his hate group propaganda by likening those groups with domestic terrorists. While the FBI cannot investigate hate groups without probable cause, the DHS has far fewer restrictions when it comes to investigating terrorists. This is one of the greatest dangers posed by vigilante civil rights groups who use inflammatory smears and labels to denigrate others. Earlier this month, a shooting spree at a conservative lobbying group in D.C. was foiled by a security guard, who was shot in the process. That group, the Family Research Council, had been labeled a hate group by Mark Potok in 2010, a charge that Potok has repeated incessantly in the media since then. It's bad enough employing these kinds of inflammatory, dehumanizing labels in their fundraising propaganda, but now Mr. Potok and the SPLC have actual blood on their hands. Don't allow the vigilantes at the SPLC and the other hate industry organizations to do your thinking for you. When they make serious claims, it's up to them to produce serious evidence. Obviously, the media isn't going to do it for us. Hopefully, this video has demonstrated just how little effort is required to debunk the SPLC's hate group claims. If you'd like more information, visit the Watching the Watchdogs blog, and we'll show you how they do it. Thank you.